It's been nearly 50 years since Christopher Reeve starred in Superman, the 1978 film that kicked off what would become an endless wave of superhero movies. Since then, Superman has been rebooted multiple times with different actors in the lead role. Directors have often tried to modernize the hopelessly square and predictable Clark Kent and his equally straightforward alter ego, adding more humanity and depth to make him feel fresh and relatable. It made sense they'd done exactly that with Batman, and it worked brilliantly. But that tone never really fit the character of Superman, who, since his comic book debut during World War II and later in the iconic 1950s TV series, has represented a kind of old-school American idealism in its purest, most optimistic, and uncompromising form. Both of the Superman reboots in the 21st century were directed by top-tier filmmakers familiar with the genre at the height of their careers. And yet, calling them successful would be generous. Box office numbers fell short, and both projects had their planned sequels scrapped. Much like the invincible Man of Steel himself grows weak around kryptonite, the once unstoppable superhero genre is now struggling under the weight of audience fatigue. The story of a godlike figure raised among mortals who fights for the oppressed is interesting in theory, but it's hard to create real tension when your main character is basically a Christ-like messiah immune to almost every threat. Without vulnerability, it's tough to find genuine drama. Handling one of pop culture's greatest icons is no easy task. Superman wasn't just supposed to save people. This time, he was called to save the entire comic book genre from itself, from another round of box office flops. He was meant to give DC a clean slate, a whole new cinematic universe. Enter James Gunn, the blockbuster director best known for Guardians of the Galaxy. Warner Brothers and DC brought him in to rescue the situation and breathe new life into a character literally everyone on the planet knows. Together with Peter Safran, Gunn came on board as producer, personally took the director's chair, and even wrote the script himself. Gunn clearly understood that audiences are burnt out on cookie-cutter comic book movies. With this new Superman, he set out to flip the approach, not just for the fate of one studio, but for the very idea of what a superhero film can be. This was meant to be the first big step in building a brand new cinematic universe. Gunn's goal? Reimagine Superman for a new generation, less God, more man. That's exactly why he made the cold, calculated decision to drop Henry Cavill from the role, despite the actor's devoted fanbase. Cavill's flawless looks, combined with his stiff, unchanging expression and the fact that he's not getting any younger, all played a part in the controversial recasting, especially after his much-hyped, long-awaited cameo at the end of Black Adam alongside Dwayne Johnson. Now, we're looking at a bold reboot of this iconic DC hero, one that's the complete opposite, both in tone and storyline, from Zack Snyder's darker take. Many found Man of Steel dull, too serious, lacking charisma and any real spark. It was an ambitious but heavy-handed attempt at realism, with Snyder trying to recreate the grounded tone of Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. But while that worked for Batman, it didn't quite click for Superman, especially at the box office. This time, the pendulum has swung all the way to the other side, and it's not necessarily what the core audience wanted. The reboot feels like a loud, cartoonish spectacle dropped into an already overstimulated world. It's exactly what fans feared when the Snyderverse was scrapped. From the return of the classic trunks over pants costume to the rambling, artificial storytelling, the film veers into a chaotic, unserious, almost infantile tone for a character who was once portrayed as a global savior. For most of the film, Gunn, whose Suicide Squad sequel was sharp, fun, and refreshingly different, seems to be wrestling with the challenge of making Superman. Well, interesting. The reboot bets heavily on colorful fun and crowd-pleasing spectacle, while occasionally tossing in real-world commentary to stay relevant. It's hard to imagine a more radical 180 in franchise management. Where Snyder's films were grim, mythic battles of titans, Gunn's Superman is quirky, irreverent, almost childishly defiant, and oddly sentimental. In the film, people frequently call Superman the Kryptonian or the alien, basically treating him like an untrustworthy foreigner. Gunn leans into that. He reframes one of the most recognizable superheroes as an immigrant story, focusing on his humanity instead of his godlike powers. In potential, that sounds like a clever, timely twist, especially in today's overcrowded superhero landscape. It's a fresh angle on a story that's been retold over and over again. But whether it actually works, that's still very much up for debate. Gunn doesn't just ditch the seriousness and gloom of Snyder's universe, he also spares us yet another exhausting origin story. Instead, he cuts the exposition down to a bare minimum and throws us straight into the middle of the action. On one hand, that's probably the smart move. At this point, Superman's backstory is just as baked into pop culture as Peter Parker's radioactive spider bite or Bruce Wayne watching his parents get gunned down in an alley. On the other hand, when you're dropped straight into a fully operating universe, it creates a weird kind of disorientation. Sure, it saves the audience an hour of setup we've already seen many times, but it also feels like we've missed an important first chapter, like we accidentally skipped the pilot episode and started watching mid-season. Characters show up, they do stuff, but it's hard to feel the emotional weight of any of it. There's no real sense of why they matter, at least not yet. After a few lines of on-screen text to set the stage, Gunn makes casting David Corenswet as Superman turned out to be a relatively solid choice. Previously known mostly for his work in television production, Corenswet brings a lot of infectious earnestness, warmth, and humanity to the role. He's clearly trying his hardest to play a hero who genuinely wants to make the world a better place. He has the right look for it too. His expressions often hover between a smile and a wince, like he's constantly juggling hope and vulnerability. His Boy Scout energy, brightness, and openness all feel like a good fit for this version of Clark Kent. At times, it's even hard not to think of Christopher Reeve. The way Corenswet combines outward innocence, genuine naivety, and a touch of clumsiness with casual brute strength feels like a nod to the iconic Superman of the past. That said, playing Superman is military tech, social division, international crises, fake news, and his own messianic myth. The dynamic between Corenswet's Superman and Rachel Brosnahan's Lois Lane is one of the film's stronger points. On screen, she's tiny next to him but far more assertive. Brosnahan plays Lois as a sharp, scrappy, principled journalist who never loses her cool no matter how intense things get. She's not just the superhero's love interest, she's someone with her own mission who actively drives the plot. On top of that, it's pretty much second nature for her to call out the Man of Steel. There's a lack of real chemistry between Clark and Lois, especially when it comes to emotional intimacy and dramatic weight. It feels like they've been married for years, and all the passion is long gone. Nicholas Hoult, who by the way auditioned for the lead role, comes off, at least at first glance, as cold and menacing. His version of Lex Luthor is calculated and ruthless, someone who hates Superman long before the opening credits roll. His hatred isn't rooted in petty villainy, it's baked into his entire personal ideology. Their conflict is supposed to be more than he's basically a Silicon Valley tech billionaire with a fascist streak who sunk his claws into government industries, military contracts, and even international affairs. Unfortunately, despite Holt's efforts, the writers have framed this potentially demonic puppet master like just another James Bond-style villain. It gets especially ridiculous when Lex starts hysterically proclaiming himself the greatest mind in human history. It's the kind of thing that just invites skepticism. The film's central trio clearly has potential for future development, and their chemistry feels solid. But it's hard to believe they'll reach the same iconic status as Christopher Reeve, Margot Kidder, and Gene Hackman, the legendary trinity that kicked off the original franchise back in the late 70s. Given how shaky and unpredictable modern comic book movie universes have become, that's a pretty safe bet. Another trademark. In the Suicide Squad, that chaotic approach felt bold and deliberate. Here, not so much. Even John Williams' classic Superman theme, which plays throughout the film, can't really give this scattered narrative the weight or gravitas it's reaching for. The film leans heavily on Krypto the Superdog to smooth over its rough spots. The CGI terrier is basically a walking, barking embodiment of all the dog nobody in Metropolis seems to care. People barely even look up from their phones, maybe a few nervous yawns at best. Superpowered brawls between metahumans and aliens are apparently so routine now that folks just stroll around underneath the battling giants like it's no big deal. Even more ridiculous is a TV news segment that's somehow powerful enough to flip public opinion from worshipping Superman to outright hating him, practically in the blink of an Marvel in the geopolitical nonsense department is another question entirely. This makes Sokovia look like a model of realism. We've all gotten used to DC superhero stories being told in a completely different key from Marvel's. DC leans into tragedy, loss, the harsh realities of the world, mature themes, and a darker, gothic aesthetic. Every time the studio bosses have tried to jump onto Marvel's bright, optimistic playground, it's usually ended in box office disasters and a flood of backlash from the most loyal fans. That's why Zack Snyder's cinematic universe, with its muted color palette, grandiose scale, and almost biblical undertones, still feels, for most casual viewers, like the more natural and faithful approach to the canon. James Gunn's bold reboot of the universe inevitably runs headfirst into the shadow cast by Snyder's iteration. The sweeping epic feel, the philosophical undertones, and the level of detail we saw in the full Justice League director's cut made fans believe in the possibility of a grand, majestic future for the franchise. Henry Cavill's Clark Kent wasn't just another superhero, he was a near mythological figure, a god trying to grasp humanity, whose power felt like destiny, not just flashy posturing. His inner conflict, loneliness, and restraint were carved in stone, a portrayal of Superman locked in eternal struggle between duty and personal desire. His strength wasn't a cause for celebration, it was a burden carried with silent dignity. Kevin Costner and Russell Crowe, playing Kal-El's human and Kryptonian fathers, brought a sense of parental wisdom and mentorship to the story. Both characters understood that Clark would one day become the starting point for a new world order, but neither rushed fate. They let him find his own way. Diane Lane's Martha Kent left a mark too, radiating sincere maternal care and warmth in raising her only son. By contrast, the universe was a dark saga of invasion and salvation, tragedy and triumph, and the exploration of where the divine meets the human. Gunn's reboot, in contrast, is a shiny, promising wrapper filled with chaotic content that melts away in your memory as fast as popcorn on your tongue. James Gunn's take on Superman feels like he threw every comic book about Kryptonian he could find, and his entire filmography, into a blender, hit puree, and poured the result onto the big screen as some kind of cinematic experiment. Superhero films in previous decades, especially Marvel's early runs, succeeded because they tried to dig deeper. They explored questions of identity, tackled social and political issues, wrestled with military ethics, and even dipped into the philosophical. That's exactly what comics always did too. On the big screen, these stories sparked huge public conversations and debates, all while still serving up spectacle with a side of mostly well-timed humor. Of course, over time the genre became too repetitive, too predictable, and so tangled up in itself that audiences started to lose interest. But Gunn went even further. He threw out not just the pretension, but the gravity and complexity too. And